Now that's significant. The Market Research Podcast. Hi everyone, thanks for joining us on Now That's Significant, a market research podcast. This is your host, Michael Howard. Today, we're joined by Jamin Brazil, someone who really needs no introduction, but here goes. He was a co-founder and CEO of Decipher, subsequently taking over the CEO responsibilities of Focus Vision once it was acquired. Today, Jamin, co-founder and chairman of Hub UX, a research operation platform for private panel management, qualitative automation, including video audition questions and surveys. Additionally, he is the host of the Happy Market Research Podcast, which recently aired its 500th episode. Amazing. Thanks for joining us on the show today, Jamin.
No, it's an honor to be part of it. Thank you so much. And congratulations on launching a new market research podcast.
Thank you. That's exciting times. Everyone here on board's pretty happy that we're going down this road and interested to see where it goes. So.
Yeah, well, I mean, you know, the benefit of podcasts is really still surfacing, but I think when you look at companies like Spotify, which have just been blowing up over the last 5 years, and their like acquisition of was it Gimlet for $100 million, which is just a podcast production company. It just goes to show you that the way that we consume content, knowledge, and entertainment is perfectly like combined in inside of a podcast. And so, you know, with what you're doing, Ipsos broadly, it's very, very exciting.
Yes, indeed. So, as we know, you're rather well connected and knowledgeable about the market research sector. One thing we do like to do on our show is to ask our guests what the most significant thing they want to share with us. So far away.
It's an interesting question because it does create this like rank order, and I can't have two most important things. I think for me, the most significant thing that we have been faced with as consumer insights professionals and as an consumer insight industry is really around relationship and how that has been impacted by shelter in place, aka the COVID global pandemic. And when you frame that up, you know, you kind of like start back at the beginning of it. Historically, we've been a like, you know, in-person industry, like categorically in-person industry. And that completely shifted. And today, the single largest impediment to growth is quite literally talent. You know, we started the pandemic with, oh my gosh, am I going to have a job tomorrow? And now we're in a spot where organizations quite literally can't staff the open jobs that they have. There's literally a war on talent. And so as you think about like the organizational asset, which is really tied up in HR, and that's under fire in the consumer insights industry, but then across all industries, you know, companies like Ipsos and all the big players, right, and small players, we're losing talent to large, you know, Amazons and Googles and so there's a big impediment right now for our space to growth is quite literally just that thing is access to being able to staff the jobs that can allow us to get the work done.
Yes, but quite a juicy statement there. So let's dig into that a little. There's almost no one who has been able to avoid the trail of disruption that COVID-19 left in its wake, even now over 2 years later. So why don't we just quickly recap some of the impact that this has had on the workforce?
Yeah, I mean, you kind of like start back, as I was saying before, we were an in-person industry. When you looked at the SMR's distribution of revenue in qualitative, which, you know, qualitative is, you know, definitionally a connection, a human connection, it was 80-20, 80% in person in the pre-COVID, and it moved immediately to 100% digital, which was just like massive shift You think about the way that we sold. Our industry sells in person. It's about, we're a relationship business, even though, whatever it is, $60 billion space, people are still picking up, the phone saying, oh yeah, I'll be there tomorrow. And we're in person with a client. The way that we collaborated with clients, the way that we connected with our staff, right? We would have these moments, and you probably remember them, where on a daily basis, we would be in an office environment and we'd go get a donut or a coffee or whatever. And we'd run into people at the water cooler, right? The pre-virtual water cooler, and have a conversation about whatever shows were trending, or, all of that was extracted from our lives in quite literally a moment. And now you kind of you fast forward, mask restrictions are being removed in the US as of January 15th this year, which is just passed, well, at least in California. And so that's kind of an exciting moment for the US, but of course, who knows how that's going to change in the future. Travel bans are being lifted in some areas, but being more restrictive in other areas, right? I think, Australia is a good example as you think about the differences at a global level. Yeah, but I mean, for me, I think the biggest impact that is the biggest unexpected impact has been the isolation, the forced isolation that we have been having to endure, as categorically. And that's brought around some benefit for us, because it's allowed us to take our kids to school at 8:30 in the morning, whereas I would have been at work at 7 o'clock that morning, or pick them up, or make dinner, or right. It's added a tremendous amount of freedom in our lives, but at a cost of being at home alone for extended periods of time. And so really it's changed the way that we connect, which for many companies, I think has been, unless you are a work remote first culture going into COVID, I think you've, really caught without a plan on how to be able to successfully navigate this completely new way of having to interact.
Right. There's a lot of value in some of the mindsets or reasons behind the move to agile. So you get basically cross-functional teams together. So you have developers, you've got marketing, you've got sales, you've got finance, you've got all of those people that sit close together and feed off each other and are having conversations that you just wouldn't have if you were just within your own your function, just with marketing, etc. So in the insights world, like that, it's the same kind of thing. You're not able to go and have those conversations, those one-off little chance encounters or moments, as you said, that could lead to value XYZ down the chain. So,
well, and that's kind of the broad point, right? Is that you're absolutely right that you can't have that unless the environments are manufactured and forced accordingly. So there has been very successful organizations that are remote first, right? So like Lookback is a good example. They're a UX platform, and they have, whatever it is, 3,000 active companies using it. They're more in the UX space as opposed to the market research space. Yeah. But their team, I don't know how big they are, it's about 30-ish to 40 employees. They're entirely remote first going into COVID. And so they had the frameworks for an agile, a team to be able to work successfully as you're describing, but that's because that was that culture. That was baked into how they got stuff done. But 95% of us especially in the market research space, we didn't have those tools in place. We didn't know how to create those moments of connection. And so, yeah, you're absolutely right. We were really caught in a rough space of how to get stuff done. And what wound up happening is a lot of fear, I think, short term, right? Because market research budgets shut down for brands for 3 months, and then they just the floodgates opened up, and how are you going to get all the work done? at least for some companies, not all companies. But there was a big chasm that organizations had to cross in terms of how they were going to relate to their organizations or their employees. And what happened psychologically, which I found this very interesting, is there was an attitude of let's wait and see what happens. And so quite literally, most companies lost a year because we didn't act quickly initially and decisively initially of this is what we're going to do, and we're going to create these new policies and tools, and this is what work looks like in our business. Instead, they're like, how long is this going to last? Let's just wait and see. And all of that ambiguity created it was more than a distraction, it was a barrier for connection. Thinking about your agile team structure, there wasn't this is how we're going to do it today, right, approach. And so we kind of like backed into this slowly of, we've got to figure this out. But it was a Band-Aid approach that we took almost categorically. And I talked to a lot of executives, and a lot of those and those conversations are public, by the way, on my podcast. And there just wasn't a clear plan in many cases. It was like, we're going to use email, or we're going to use Slack more, or some. It's like there was not like this, like here's the map that we're putting in front of us, and how people are going to, we're going to replicate the water cooler talk this way. Nobody had an answer to that.
No, that's true. And if you do take something out of an organization that was habitual before and in place, it's even harder to start that up again, isn't it? Without really concerted effort.
Yeah, I mean, and this is all like, armchair quarterbacking, as they would say in the US.
Mm-hmm.
I get to look back and say, this is what we did badly, and so on and so forth. But, I mean, the truth of the matter is that it's the truth of the matter. And as we kind of as we look forward, this is an interesting, for me, this has been very interesting. Big brands are now doing what if scenarios as part of their corporate planning, and they'll pick 5 very unlikely, I mean, arbitrarily, I'm saying 5, but some number of, and they'll pick it like, what are the 5 things that could happen tomorrow that will dramatically impact our brand that are not baked into our budget? And then from that, they'll create like, this is what we're going to do to execute against that. And we as research professionals, depending on the size of the organization, need to be thinking about that as well. Obviously we don't have, millions of dollars to throw at these kinds of answers, but we should have those what if scenarios baked out. And so that if we see a contraction in the market research space, that we're, not on our heels again, trying to figure out what we're going to do, but we can move decisively through it and know how and have a plan.
Sure. So what issues are emerging for companies that support this hybrid in-office and remote workers that you've seen throughout your...
Yeah, hybrid is an interesting way of saying it. It's like, I see it like this, and this is going to be super controversial to the market researchers. Like, you can't be half pregnant. You're either remote first or you're in person first. If you're in person first, so what happens is, if you and I are in an office environment together, okay, and you're my boss, then I'm going to stop by the door. I'm going to stop by the door jam on my way into, by your office on the way to get coffee. And if your door is open and you're sitting there on your phone or whatever, we'll say, hey, what's going on, Michael? And you're going to, we're going to have some fun banter for like 30 seconds or something. And then that's it, right? We created a connection there. And there's a power that's in that connection that you're not going to get with your other employees, your other subordinates. And so that dynamic is just fundamentally human, right? You can't like pretend it doesn't exist. And so, well, you can pretend it doesn't exist, but it does exist. And so when there's, when you're thinking about promotions or raises or that kind of thing, the value of our relationship is greater than that of we would have with a subordinate who is not in the office. And so if you are going to be as you're articulating it, a hybrid environment, then there just needs to be clarity that power dynamic will exist inside of the organization, right? And so now you're uncomfortable because you're an executive. You're like, well, I can't have that because I have important people that are remote, right? Okay, I get that, but that doesn't matter. Like the reality is that relationships are forged in person first because it's convenient.
Mm.
So now you have to create policies that help equalize the power dynamic or the playing field of the organization. Those policies are things like creating a period before the meeting. If our meeting starts at 9 a.m., right? Then maybe the first 5 minutes, it still starts at 9 a.m., but maybe the first 5 minutes they're structured to be that kind of like chit chat time, right?
Yep.
And that's like built into the agenda. But this is the part that most people miss. It isn't just at the beginning. There needs to be time at the end of meetings as well. And so all too often I see we've got a meeting agenda, we exit the meeting because we're in a hurry to get off the call to do something else, right? Get into another meeting, get some work done, whatever, right? But that just is unsatisfactory. Like we need to force, the host needs to force, I'm going to stay here until the end of the meeting, right? Even unless everybody exits. And what I've seen, like categorically, companies that implement this, there's, some portion, maybe 25% of the attendees of the meeting will actually hang out for a few minutes afterwards, chit chat, laugh, talk, and connect. And so like, that's an example of how you can help equalize that power base. The second part of that is if you and I are in the same office, I need to be at my station or where my computer is to actually have that conversation, because it's different if we're in the same room. And now all of a sudden it starts feeling uncomfortable again, doesn't it? Because it's like, well, I'd rather sit by Michael, and why can't everybody see half of our faces together, right? But I mean, this is just, and the answer is really important because it's about equalizing the playing field, right? And so like we have to be uncomfortable with the fact that if you are being hybrid, then there is natural relationship biases that are being built inside of the power structure of the organization. And you're leaving out the people that are remote, unless there's a tremendous amount of discipline and willingness, like part of the culture, to remove those biases as much as possible, so that you create these not optimal working environments like what I just described.
It's true. So in my last company I worked for, we had a sub office, if you will, in another city. And I was working there prior to the pandemic and after it as well, or during it, still going. And it was interesting, the dynamic there, because we were a remote office, we were essentially remote workers. And once the pandemic came in, we were all forced to shelter in place. The head office and the employees there were able to understand what it was like working as we were prior. So you actually saw this that playing field come right up, and everyone, we put in policies. We had the was it the 20 and the 15-minute meetings rather than the half an hour and the hour, just for that exact purpose, so it can give people time to get a cup of tea, to stay on, to get to the next meeting, etc. So it was pretty cool.
It to your point, I mean, it feels like if you're remote, it feels like you're a second-class citizen, because all those conversations are happening, you just don't have the opportunity to participate, and that doesn't feel good.
Yeah, and so now that I've come here, I'm at a head office in my own city now, and I've been in working from the office as much as I can do, just because I have missed that connection prior. So a big reversal.
Good. Well, I mean, and then it's about the intentionality, right, around building the workforce. And a lot of the problem there is like HR hasn't had to create those things, those policies in the past, and so they're not oftentimes equipped to be able to push against the executive power base. And executives are just, sorry guys, but we're lazy, and gals, we're lazy when it comes to these kinds of things. And so it's easy to not put time and treasure against it, but it as employees or as HR becomes the currency of the future, which it absolutely is, right? I mean, if there's a war on talent that has been happening for the last 6 months and is not looking like it's going to subside. So in that world, like HR becomes the treasure trove, the investment place for us to be able to achieve our growth goals.
Yes. So considering what we've talked about now, what policies, tips, and systems can we as market researchers and organizations put in place to increase employee engagement?
Yeah, I mean, we kind of talked on one of the ones that I think is really important, right? Is having meeting times that are not like on the 30 minutes and on the hour, and having time that's in between. But I think for policies, like it's vital for the organization, the HR, to lead with the intent and purpose of the policies, because it's really easy for, like, going back to like, if you and I are in the same office, and it'd be easy for us to have that meeting and, together in the room versus me in my cube and you in your office, right? That doesn't feel great. But we have other remote people. So if the policy is like, if that's the policy that you have, it's one terminal to every person, then that feels bad. But if you lead with what the intention is, right, then it creates a positive framework. I'll give you an example. It used to be the case before COVID, anybody that shared their video on a Zoom call was kind of a weirdo. Right? I mean, you remember what it was like. There'd be maybe one or two people that would share their video, and then you'd have 9 others that would just not be, right? And part of that was just a function of remote meetings not being taken seriously and people getting up and doing whatever it is that they wanted to do. But then the other part of it was gosh, because I'm not in person, I didn't bother putting on a shirt today or whatever. And so if the policy now is everybody needs to share their camera almost most of the time, then like we need to lead with what's the intent. And the intent of that is to prioritize relationships. So, this enforces this, like, the company and the manager, this idea that the company and the manager actually give a shit about the employee, as opposed to, I want to make sure that you're sitting in front of your camera and we're, monitoring your every moment. It isn't about, like, a lot of times policies can be perceived as negative by the employee, but that's because oftentimes the company, and if that's the case, the company needs to reevaluate the why of that. And I think that was one of my big learnings of that first 12 months of the pandemic was companies weren't leading with the why, they were leading with the policy, but they were forgetting that they were forgetting the most, like the 80% of that policy communication needs to be about the benefit to the employee. And subsequently, right, that needs to be reinforced by, if the employee isn't finding it beneficial, then it needs to be reassessed, and there needs to be mechanisms that are put in place for that. So anyway, I think leading with the why or the intention is really important for any policy that's put in place. The second one is humility, in my opinion, needs to be a core value inside of the organization. And I'm putting humility as sort of this like placeholder, but it might be a different word depending on the regional differences. But it's really about the executive standing up and saying, we don't know what we're doing, but don't worry, we have a plan that probably will work. And we're going to try new things, and some of them are going to work and some of them aren't. We're going to be transparent with you, and we're also open to your feedback, right? Like, that's really important, because unless we're willing to try new things, then we're going to keep doing stuff. We're going to default. It's regression to the mean. We're going to keep. It's just naturally easier for us to do the stuff that is normal. It's easier for me to sit in the room with you as opposed to how we're doing this right now. So yeah, the third thing for me is, most executives have a open door policy. By nature of open door policy means you have to be able to walk through the door. And one of the things that I saw happen was executives didn't create a virtual like office hours time. And so while there wasn't, sure, you can send me an email or something like that, there wasn't this like structured framework that existed where employees felt comfortable with that. I'm sure they could DM the executive on Slack or whatever, but oftentimes I found as an executive myself, of a, reasonably large workforce, where it's tricky. It's tricky to for an employee to address a C-level executive, or even an SVP or VP. And so by saying my door, I'm open. I'm going to be at my desk at this time, right? And here's the link if you want to access it, and then and you'll see people will show up. It's crazy.
Yeah. So one thing that worked really well with us, last company again, a morning tea couple with the leadership team.
Exactly.
And that started and it was going all right, but you've got an interesting dynamic of online where if you've got a slightly harder question, you probably won't ask it. So we implemented another thing, which was anonymous questions. And so giving people the chance to ask those tougher questions meant those meetings were actually quite, what they could potentially cover those things that people want to say but are a bit afraid. And I guess
yeah, and that's such a great point. And at Decipher we had early days, right? We had actually a comment box, so everybody's together in an office, right? And Fresno, California. And so it was easy to create a physical card and people would write stuff in it and drop it in. And sometimes you get some serious stuff in there, right? Yeah. Check it once a week. And then that eventually moved to, as the offices expanded, that moved to a virtual comment box. And then that eventually moved to a weekly HR touchpoint survey.
Yeah.
That we did. And so, this is a really, really good example of systems that need to be put in place that with intentionality. The other thing that we don't think about is inappropriate behavior by managers or anybody in the organization. Like is there a bat phone or a red line or a way for somebody who's being harassed to be able to raise their hand and say, this is a big problem for me, in a safe way? If that should be something that I was just doing some consulting for a company and they didn't have that in place. And interestingly enough, 24% of their workforce was voiced being harassed in the last 12 months.
Wow.
So, yeah. And so by virtue of not having it, a lot of times executives are operating in a vacuum of, well, we don't have an issue. And then when that data comes up, it's like, that's a big problem. Right? So just by surfacing the ability for people to do things can start curbing behavior of bad actors in the organization because they have fear of reprisal or potentially discovery. And that's, many of us have raised children or are raising children or plan to raise children. It's just creating clear boundaries.
That's right. One thing we've talked about at the moment is the engagement of employees, but not prospective employees. And I heard a podcast on another show. Someone was talking about the length of the time of recruitment. So used to be that you'd have your job opening and it would be for 30 days open, apply to the end of here. But they were saying you've got to do the whole process within a week now for certain roles because people are being thrown about offers left, right, and center. You've got ghosting that happens. So get it over and done with, get that offer out to them, and then wrap it up as soon as you can.
Yeah, you're exactly right. It's very much the power base right now is in the employee side. You and I have been around long enough to see things on both sides, right? Who knows how long this is going to be, but it is what it is, right? So so two things. One is time to recruit obviously is critical right now. That means that there has to be HR has to have fast track policies on ways that they can attract, interview, or vet, and then hire and negotiate with an employee. Because a different client I was doing some consulting for, they had a senior level executive, and I did an interview with him, and he was super excited about the job. Well, the following week he had already accepted another job. Yeah, and it was because the process, to your point, it took 2 weeks.
Mm.
It needed to take a week. If they could have started on Monday and ended on Friday, that would have been great, but
Yeah.
it didn't. Right? And so, like time to hire should be a KPI that organizations are managing, that HR is being accountable for, and that's really important. And so, I think the HR pipeline though is important. When you think about how you're going to hire, how you're going to attract top talent, well, you look at your current top talent, and then that they're like produces like, and those people are connected to top performers.
Yeah.
And so, really leveraging that employee referral program is, a mechanism that is fantastic. And another thing that'll set you apart, if you look at, depending on the age that you're trying to hire for, if you look at social as we see the traditional mechanisms like place a job posting on LinkedIn, or what I'm saying, or on the website, or Monster, whatever. So all these different places, but that requires a potential hire to go someplace that they're not, and then find that and have that discovery experience. So you're already biasing it to people that are looking for a job, which inherently has some bad things associated with it. Okay. Some good things, but there's some issues there too. Yeah. So a better way of augmenting, or I should say, a way of augmenting that work that may attract a better overall employee is go to where they are. And if you're on depending on the age base, but I would say every HR department should have TikTok as a consideration of how they're reaching the next generation of employees at their firm, right? Yeah. And TikTok itself, they do this beautifully, of course. But go look at, I forget what the hashtag is, but look at they have TikTok actually has their own hashtag on what it's like to be an employee at TikTok. And it's fantastic content. Yeah. Or maybe it's Insta or Facebook or LinkedIn or whatever, right? But it can't always, the way that we recruit now needs to be a lot more sales oriented, versus just the facts, ma'am, where here's the job description, here's the about us company bio, and here's the salary range, right?
Yeah. You're getting that brand, like employee brand, which is talked about a lot, up in there. So you see, okay, if you're going to be like this as an employee, this is what you're going to be like as a customer, sort of focused right. Brand as well. So no, that's awesome. What tools can we use then to help try and push up this employee engagement, and tips on how to use them well?
Yeah, I mean, so 2 tools that I think every should have, and probably most of them do. The first one for me is Slack. Slack is vital for those in the doorway conversations. It's sort of this email is really good for internal, external communication on a specific topic. Slack is really good for, oh my gosh, I need to address this particular issue, or here's a piece of art. What do you think about, here's some artwork that I'm working on right now for this project. What do you think about that? Or I'm QAing this survey, or, anybody have an idea on this analytics plan or proposal, or et cetera, et cetera. Yeah. Or does anybody know a lead, a contact at this particular company, right? If you're sales. So Slack kicks ass for that type of communication. Additionally, Slack has integrated, as the video functionality as well. So, you don't have to open up a Zoom or whatever. You can have those conversations dynamically inside of the platform. So the intentionality around Slack is, in my opinion, needs to be very much that in the doorway, or gosh, I've got a problem, I need to solve it, so I'm going to go talk to Michael about how to do that, right? Hey, do you have a minute, or what have you? As well as in-time announcements, all that kind of stuff. It's great, but it's basically like an in-time platform. A lot of times I see the mistake that companies make is they treat it like a repository, and it's not a repository. It's just impossible to be able to pull historical information out in a useful way, right? Yeah. It's just not set up for that. And so, in that framework, I think really in the, the utilization of the tool, why it's being used will help justify to the CFO it's worth the, $14 per employee or whatever it is. But on top of it, it'll help reinforce to the employee what, when, and why, and how they should be using it.
I think that just quickly on that, the GIFs and stickers, etc. Like that's an amazing part of it as well, and can just add those additional moments of connection, etc. Celebrating a win here and there, or like thanks to this or that. It's pretty cool.
I mean, it's this beautiful blend, right, of professional and sort of like off the cuff humor that you can inject.
Yeah.
Excuse me. So, yeah, I mean, yeah, GIFs are just brilliant. Who such a silly thing, and yet it's like created this level of humanity inside of the boring old, stuff.
And sometimes you have to check yourself, like, shouldn't I? Oh, it's fine.
And I've gotten my hand slapped. We use Discord a lot, which is not I don't necessarily think it's perfect for employee or company level communication. I think it's better for community-based communication, but I'm a big user of Discord, and I have had one instance specifically in a gaming user experience platform, community, which is really big, and I've got a great brand, but I had to backtrack. I had to apologize to the community. I posted something that I thought was hilarious as a Gen Xer, but it turns out that it was slightly offensive to some of the people. And so, like, slightly, I mean, it was offensive to some of the people. Yeah. And so, and that's the part that I think gets really tricky is we are operating in a almost zero tolerance for humor. Yeah. And so that stuff's permanent, especially if you have it inside of a channel. So there's tension inside of the organization, and I'm comfortable enough with it to say, gosh, I just need to be who I am in the context of community, right? So that my intentions follow through, knowing sometimes I might make a mistake, in which case I'm not going to be all defensive against it. I'm gonna be like, holy moly, I made a big mistake. I'm very sorry. And move through it, right? So it isn't, incidentally, in my mistake, there wasn't anything where it was hurting a human. It was just the way that I had a meme that I had posted was just not well received. So.
But if that humility, like you're mentioning, if that's at the top and it flows down, then it provides a bit of protection.
Coverage.
Well, so,
Totally. The second tool I think is Notion. So Notion is a modern wiki. For those that don't use it, I'm sure most companies do use it at this point or some variant of it. Some other competitor of Notion, but like you need to have a tool that is about information discoverability and accessibility. And that framework needs to work both internally and externally. And what I mean by that is maybe you have a customer and you're doing a project that's going to be a year long. So you can create a Notion document which allows that customer to access that document. And it's just, a laundry list of what's happening inside of with that project over time. Yeah, sure. And so and then the same thing with like employee onboarding, policies, handbooks, all that kind of stuff, right? Can exist inside of Notion very successfully. So yeah, I see Notion as this thing of like asynchronous communication, where it's out of time. It's literally built for out of time communication. Yeah. Long-term accessibility and visibility. Whereas Slack is very much an synchronous or in-time platform.
Well, very nice. So I think that just about wraps us up. So did you want to give us a quick little recap of the points we've discussed today on the tight labor market and how to navigate through that?
I think that, if you are being gated on growth because of your employee count, in other words, you're trying to staff jobs that will add revenue to the business, then you have to take a really hard look at why someone would want to work at your company and how you're currently reaching the top of the funnel. And so to that end, you need to have a strategy. If you care, you need to have a strategy on social. It's going to take you outside of your normal comfort zone. You need to have a strategy on internal communications, which involves both policies and then tools that are purpose used. And then categorically, like everything needs to be wrapped up in culture. So it is very much about experimentation and humility and transparency with the employees.
Yeah, nice. One final thing from me is just helping your team to get back that joy that they had when they first started out in the profession, and a lot of that is being able to see the progress that you've made or the contribution you make to the business as well. And if we can start showing that, getting it out and publishing it across the business as well, internally, sometimes externally as well, you can really just lift people's perception, view, and satisfaction in their roles.
Love it.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much for joining us on the show today, Jamin. It's been a really interesting discussion. So thank you.
Honored to be here, everyone. Hope you tune into this podcast. I certainly will be long-term.
Thanks kindly. For the listeners out there, if you've liked what you heard today, please feel free to subscribe to the podcast. Also share it with others who might also find it helpful. Feel free to get in touch if you'd like to be on the show as well. For now, thanks for listening to Now That's Significant.